Look at the palm of your hand for a moment. Not quickly. Really look at the lines. Do they seem to form a clear letter M? Or somewhere among those curves, can you see a shape that resembles a crescent moon? And what if you can see both? For most people, these are simply natural lines in the skin. But in palmistry and spiritual symbolism, shapes like these have been given deeper meanings for generations. Meanings connected with intuition, character, hidden awareness, and the cycles of change we pass through in life. And this is where the mystery becomes fascinating, because perhaps these markings are not about having your future permanently written into your hand. Perhaps they symbolize something happening much deeper, the strange meeting point between what your mind can clearly recognize and what your intuition seems to feel before you can explain it. That idea becomes even more intriguing when we place these symbols beside the mysterious world associated with Nostradamus. His cryptic predictions have been interpreted and reinterpreted for centuries, often because their meaning seems hidden beneath symbols and uncertainty. So what happens when we look at the M and the crescent moon through that same symbolic lens? That is where this mystery truly begins. To understand why these marks feel so mysterious, we first have to understand why Nostradamus still fascinates people almost 5 centuries later. Michel de Nostradamus lived in 16th century France. He worked as a physician and astrologer, but he became famous for a collection of short, cryptic verses that later generations interpreted as predictions about events far beyond his own lifetime. What made those writings so powerful was not their clarity. It was almost the opposite. They were filled with strange images, uncertain meanings, sudden reversals, celestial signs, conflict, political change, disaster, and transformation. Nothing was presented like a simple map of the future. The language often seemed to hide more than it revealed, and that uncertainty became part of the fascination. Generation after generation returned to the same verses, searching for patterns that earlier readers might have missed. A phrase that once appeared meaningless could suddenly seem important after history changed. A symbol could be interpreted one way in one century and completely differently in another. That does not mean every later interpretation was correct, but it reveals something important about us. Human beings are deeply drawn to patterns. We want to know whether the strange detail we notice today will become meaningful tomorrow. We want to believe that beneath confusion, there might be an order we simply have not learned to see yet. And this is where the lines of the palm enter the story. There is no hidden Nostradamus verse secretly describing an M carved into the human hand. But the fascination surrounding that mark comes from the same place that keeps people returning to his mysterious writings. We see a pattern, and once we see it, we want to know what it means. Perhaps that is why the M has attracted so much attention in palmistry. Unlike an abstract curve, it looks strangely familiar, almost as though several ordinary lines have accidentally arranged themselves into something recognizable. Traditionally, that recognizable shape has been given a very particular meaning. The crescent moon carries a very different kind of meaning. Where the M feels structured, sharp, and almost deliberate, the crescent feels softer and more mysterious. It does not suggest certainty. It suggests something that is still unfolding. For centuries, the moon has been associated with cycles, dreams, emotion, intuition, imagination, and the hidden parts of life that cannot always be understood through logic alone. And the crescent is especially interesting because it is incomplete. It is not darkness, but it is not full light either. Part of the moon has appeared, while the rest remains unseen. Symbolically, that makes the crescent a powerful image of something beginning to reveal itself. Maybe it is an intuition you cannot explain yet. Maybe it is a truth about yourself that you have only recently started to admit. It could be a feeling about a relationship that has been quietly growing stronger, or perhaps a part of your identity that remained hidden for years because you were not ready to look at it clearly. Nothing has fully arrived, but something is no longer completely hidden. Traditional palmistry also connects lunar symbolism with imagination, sensitivity, dreams, inner experience, and intuition. These are beliefs and symbolic interpretations, not proven abilities, but they reveal why a moon-like shape in the hand can feel so meaningful to someone already going through a period of change. Unlike the M, the crescent does not seem to demand an answer. It waits, it senses, it moves through phases, and perhaps that is its deeper lesson. Sometimes we know that something inside us is changing long before we understand what that change will become. The M may symbolically ask, "What is the truth?" But the Crescent seems to whisper something different. Are you willing to wait until the truth is ready to reveal itself? When people begin paying closer attention to their inner world, something interesting often happens. They start noticing things that may have always been there, not because a mark in the palm has suddenly activated, but because periods of personal change can make us more alert to our own emotions, instincts, relationships, and surroundings. The first sign is a sharper awareness of people. You begin noticing the small things: a pause before someone answers, a change in their voice, a smile that does not quite reach their eyes, a sudden emotional distance where warmth used to be. These details may have passed unnoticed before. Now they seem louder. Sometimes this simply means you are becoming more observant. Sometimes it may reflect stronger emotional sensitivity. In spiritual interpretation, some people describe it as intuition becoming more active. But whatever explanation you prefer, the experience can feel strangely powerful. Once you begin seeing patterns in people, it becomes difficult to return to the way you saw them before. The second sign is more subtle. Certain thoughts begin returning. Perhaps you keep thinking about the same person, even when nothing obvious has happened. Perhaps a decision keeps pulling at your attention. Maybe there is a place, an opportunity, or a change in your life that repeatedly comes back into your mind. You may try to dismiss it, but it returns. This does not automatically mean the thought is predicting something. Sometimes the mind repeats an idea because there is an unresolved emotion beneath it. Still, spiritually minded people often interpret these recurring impressions as a form of inner guidance, a quiet suggestion that something deserves closer attention. Then there is the third sign. You become more sensitive to the emotional atmosphere around you. A conversation that once felt normal suddenly leaves you exhausted. A room can feel tense before anyone openly argues. Certain people may leave you feeling calm, while others seem to drain your energy even when nothing dramatic has happened. There are different ways to understand this. A spiritual interpretation may describe it as sensitivity to the emotional energy around you. A more grounded explanation is that you are becoming more aware of your boundaries, your stress responses, and the effect certain environments have on your mind and body. Either way, something has changed. You are no longer moving through every interaction unconsciously. You are noticing. And sometimes, awareness begins exactly like that. Not with a dramatic revelation, but with small things becoming impossible to ignore. The fourth sign often appears at night. Dreams become more vivid, more emotional, and sometimes strangely detailed. You may keep returning to the same place in your sleep. A road, a house, a doorway, water, darkness, a distant light. Or perhaps the same person appears again and again, even when you have not been thinking about them consciously. These dreams can stay with you long after you wake, not because every dream is predicting something, but because during periods of uncertainty or inner change, the mind often expresses what we have not yet found words for. A closed door may feel like an ending. A long road may feel like transition. Water may carry the feeling of emotion, while light appearing in darkness can feel like clarity slowly emerging. For spiritually minded people, dreams like these may feel like messages from the deeper self. Others may see them as the mind processing fear, memory, desire, and unresolved emotion. Either way, the important part is not to force an interpretation. It is to notice what keeps returning. Then comes the fifth sign, perhaps the most uncomfortable one. Parts of your life that once felt completely normal begin to feel strangely unfamiliar. A relationship you never questioned suddenly feels different. A routine that once gave you comfort begins to feel empty. A goal you spent years chasing no longer excites you in the same way. Even the version of yourself that everyone else seems to recognize may begin to feel like someone you have slowly outgrown. This can be unsettling because nothing outside you may have changed dramatically. The same people are there, the same responsibilities remain, the same walls surround you. but inside something no longer fits. And that may be the real connection between these 5 experiences and the symbols in the palm. Not that an M or crescent moon suddenly created a supernatural change, but that sometimes a symbol becomes meaningful because it gives us permission to look more closely at a transformation that was already happening. The hand becomes a mirror, and what you begin seeing in that mirror is not necessarily the future. It may be the part of your present that you can no longer ignore. There is another experience that often appears long before someone begins searching for symbols in their palm. It is the feeling of being different. Not necessarily better than anyone else, not chosen, just slightly outside the rhythm of the people around you. You may have been surrounded by friends, family, classmates, or co-workers and still felt strangely alone. Perhaps other people could enjoy a conversation and move on, while you kept thinking about what was really meant beneath the words. You noticed changes in someone's expression. You wondered why a person suddenly became distant. You thought about motives, meaning, emotion, and the things people rarely say directly. For someone deeply observant or introspective, ordinary life can sometimes feel surprisingly loud. You notice more, you question more, and sometimes you feel more than you know how to explain. This is where the M and the crescent can become useful symbols, not because these lines cause you to feel different, but because they reflect 2 parts of that experience. The M can symbolize the mind that analyzes what others overlook. The crescent can symbolize the inner world that is much harder to put into words. One looks outward, searching for patterns. The other turns inward, sensing something that may not yet have a name. And when those 2 tendencies exist strongly in the same person, feeling misunderstood can become almost inevitable at certain stages of life. You may have learned to hide parts of yourself simply because explaining them felt exhausting. You stopped mentioning the things you noticed. You ignored certain instincts because other people dismissed them. You made yourself easier to understand, even when doing so meant becoming less honest about what was happening inside you. So perhaps the important question is not, why have I always been different? Perhaps it is something quieter. Which parts of yourself did you learn to hide because the people around you did not know what to do with them? And once someone begins asking questions like that, another strange experience often becomes more noticeable. Coincidences. At first, they seem harmless. You think about someone you have not spoken to in months, and that person suddenly contacts you. You hear the same unusual phrase from 2 different people in the same week. A number keeps appearing. A place from a vivid dream unexpectedly enters a conversation, or you encounter exactly the information you were searching for at a moment when you were close to making an important decision. Individually, any one of these events may mean nothing unusual, but when several seem to appear close together, they can create the feeling that life is answering something you have not spoken aloud. Some spiritually minded people call these moments synchronicities. They interpret them as meaningful alignments, moments when an inner question and an outer event seem to reflect one another. To someone going through a period of transformation, that can feel deeply personal. But there is another possibility worth remembering. The human mind is extraordinarily sensitive to patterns. Once something becomes emotionally important to us, we naturally begin noticing related details more often. The number may have appeared before. The phrase may not actually be new. The difference is that now it means something to you, so your attention catches it. And perhaps that does not make the experience meaningless. The deeper mystery may not be whether every coincidence was arranged specifically for you. The more interesting question is why this particular coincidence, at this particular moment, touched something inside you strongly enough that you could not ignore it. Sometimes the event itself is ordinary, but what it awakens in you is not. Now the pieces begin to come together. Because the deeper fascination with Nostradamus was never only about prediction, it was about interpretation. His verses were often so symbolic and uncertain that later readers searched them for hidden connections, patterns that seemed meaningless at first and then suddenly appeared important after events had already changed the world around them. That way of thinking can be applied to the palm as well. Not as historical proof, not as something Nostradamus specifically wrote, but as a symbolic lens. If the M represents the desire to recognize what is hidden beneath appearances, and the crescent represents something slowly moving from darkness into light, then seeing both together creates a powerful image. It is the image of a person standing somewhere between recognition and revelation. Recognition is the moment when you notice something, a pattern in someone's behavior, a truth about yourself, a feeling you can no longer dismiss. Revelation is different. It is the moment when the meaning of what you noticed finally becomes clear. And those two moments do not always arrive together. Sometimes you recognize that something is wrong months before you understand why. Sometimes you feel that a chapter of your life is ending before you know what will replace it. Sometimes intuition points towards something long before evidence gives it a name. That space between noticing and knowing can feel mysterious. It can even feel powerful. But this is also where the symbolism begins to carry a warning. Once someone starts believing they are unusually good at recognizing hidden patterns, something subtle can happen. Every coincidence begins to look important. Every feeling starts to look like confirmation. Every unexpected event can seem connected to something larger. The person may stop asking, "Could I be wrong?" and begin asking only, "What is this trying to tell me?" That difference matters, because the greatest danger is not failing to notice a pattern. Sometimes the greater danger is becoming so convinced that a pattern exists that we begin creating meaning where there may only be uncertainty. Seen this way, the mysterious connection between the M, the Crescent, and the symbolic world associated with Nostradamus becomes much deeper. The message is no longer simply, "You can see what others cannot." It becomes something more challenging. If you believe you can see beneath the surface, can you also recognize the moment when your own mind begins deceiving you? That may be where the real test begins. If we look at the M purely as a symbol, its meaning can become much richer. Not because Nostradamus secretly placed a code inside the human hand, but because symbols often become powerful when they reflect something we are already living through. The M can suggest mystery, the unknown part of life that keeps pulling at your attention. It can represent the question you cannot quite answer, or the feeling that something is changing even though you do not yet know where that change is leading. It can also suggest memory. Not memory in the supernatural sense, but the return of lessons you once ignored. A pattern you have seen before. A mistake you promised yourself you would not repeat. A truth you understood years ago, then slowly buried because accepting it would have forced you to change. Sometimes growth does not begin with discovering something new. Sometimes it begins with remembering what you already knew. Then there is movement. There are moments in life when staying still becomes more painful than changing. A familiar situation may no longer feel safe simply because it is familiar. An old role may begin to feel too small. A relationship, belief, or identity that once defined you may suddenly feel like something you have outgrown. Movement begins when awareness becomes impossible to ignore. And from movement comes metamorphosis. Real transformation is rarely comfortable. It often begins with confusion. The old version of you still exists, but it no longer feels complete. The new version has not fully arrived. You are somewhere in between. That may be one of the deepest symbolic meanings of the M. Not the ability to detect every lie, not proof of a special destiny, but the responsibility that comes with awareness. Because once you genuinely recognize a pattern in your life, you face a choice. You can pretend you never saw it, or you can allow what you have seen to change the way you live. And that leads to a much harder question. Once you believe you see something clearly, what are you prepared to do with that awareness? The Crescent carries one more meaning that is easy to overlook. It is incomplete. But incomplete does not mean broken. A crescent moon reveals only part of what will eventually become visible. The rest is still there, hidden in darkness, waiting for its phase to change. That makes it a powerful symbol for certain moments in life. You sense that something is changing, but you cannot yet explain what. A relationship may still exist, yet it no longer feels the same. A goal you once wanted badly may begin losing its hold over you. An old version of yourself may still be visible to everyone around you, while privately you feel yourself moving away from it. You know something is happening. You simply cannot see the entire picture yet. In spiritual interpretation, the Crescent can represent parts of identity, emotion, purpose, or inner truth slowly entering awareness. Perhaps there is something you have avoided admitting, a desire you repeatedly pushed aside, a boundary you know should have been drawn long ago, or a direction that quietly attracts you even though you have no idea where it would eventually lead. The temptation in moments like these is to demand an answer immediately. We want certainty. We want the full moon while we are still standing beneath the crescent. But perhaps the symbol suggests something different. Patience. Not every feeling needs to become a conclusion. Not every intuition must immediately become a decision. And not everything that remains unclear is necessarily meant to be understood today. Sometimes clarity does not arrive like lightning. It arrives in phases. A little more becomes visible, then a little more, until one day you realize that what once seemed completely mysterious has slowly revealed enough of itself for you to understand. And this brings us to the most important warning hidden inside all of this symbolism. Intuition can guide attention, but intuition can also become a trap. The more someone becomes convinced that they possess unusual insight, the easier it becomes to treat every feeling as evidence. A coincidence happens, and suddenly it must be confirmation. A dream feels intense, and therefore it must be predicting something. Someone acts differently for one evening, and suspicion becomes certainty. A strange physical sensation appears, and the mind immediately gives it a mysterious meaning. This is where awareness can quietly turn into fear, because if everything becomes a sign, then nothing can happen without demanding interpretation. Eventually, a person may stop observing reality and begin searching only for evidence that confirms what they already believe. This is where the M and the crescent become most meaningful when placed together. Symbolically, the M seeks discernment. It wants to examine, recognize, compare, and understand. The crescent remains open to intuition, possibility, imagination, and what has not yet become clear. Neither is enough on its own. Without discernment, intuition can become uncontrolled imagination. Without openness, judgment can become rigid certainty. One part asks you to listen. The other asks you to question what you heard. That balance matters far beyond palmistry. An intuition about a relationship may be worth noticing, but it does not automatically prove another person's intentions. A recurring dream may reveal something meaningful about your emotions, but it does not guarantee that an event will happen. A sudden feeling about money, health, safety, or the future may deserve attention, but major decisions still require evidence, patience, and grounded judgment. Perhaps this is the deepest warning contained in the symbolism. Do not silence your intuition, but do not worship it either. Let it open the door, then let careful thought decide whether you should walk through. True awareness is not believing every signal that appears. It is developing the wisdom to know which signals deserve your attention and which ones should simply be allowed to pass. And now we arrive at the meaning of seeing both marks together. Not as proof that someone is more powerful than everyone else, not as evidence of a guaranteed destiny, but as a symbol of something much more difficult to master. Two ways of knowing. The M can represent observation, the part of you that watches carefully, compares details, remembers patterns, and wants evidence before accepting a conclusion. The crescent can represent intuition, the quieter part of you that senses movement before it has a name, notices emotional shifts before they are explained, and sometimes feels that something matters long before you understand why. Logic and imagination, evidence and instinct, recognition and feeling. Most people experience both, but symbolically, carrying both marks can represent the challenge of learning how to let those two voices exist without allowing either one to completely control you. Sometimes intuition speaks first and evidence arrives later. You feel uncomfortable around someone, then eventually understand why. You sense that a chapter of your life is ending, even though everything still appears normal from the outside. You feel drawn toward a change that makes no logical sense at first, only to discover months later that the old direction had already stopped fitting who you were becoming. But the opposite also happens. Sometimes intuition is fear. Sometimes a coincidence is only coincidence. Sometimes the pattern we think we see exists because we desperately need an answer. And this is where the deeper interpretation of the prophecy finally appears. The test is not whether you can predict what happens next. The test is whether you can become wise enough to know when an inner signal deserves attention and when it deserves to be questioned. That distinction can change everything. If these symbols strongly resonate with you, perhaps you are entering a period where something familiar is becoming harder to maintain. An identity you carried for years may suddenly feel false. A relationship may begin revealing something you previously avoided seeing. An instinct you kept suppressing may become louder. Or an important choice may place two paths in front of you. One feels familiar and safe. The other demands a more honest understanding of who you are now. None of these outcomes are guaranteed. The symbols do not decide which road you will take, but they can become a reminder. Observation without intuition can make life cold and rigid. Intuition without observation can make life confusing and unstable. The deeper strength comes from allowing both to speak. Notice what you feel, then examine it. Trust what you see, then question it. Perhaps that is the real meaning of carrying both symbols. Not the ability to know the future, but the responsibility to meet uncertainty with both awareness and wisdom. So look at your palm one more time. Maybe you see the M. Maybe you see the crescent. Maybe you see both. Or maybe, after everything we have explored, those lines now feel a little different. Not because they have changed, but because the way you are looking at them has. That may be the most important part of this entire mystery. Whether these shapes carry spiritual meaning, whether they are simply natural patterns formed by the lines of the hand, or whether they become meaningful because you recognize something of yourself within them, they do not have to be a verdict about your future. They can be a mirror, a reason to pay closer attention, a reminder that intuition is valuable when it leads to reflection, not when it replaces reality. So take one thing that has been returning to you lately. It could be a dream, an intuition, an emotional pattern, a concern about a relationship, or simply something you keep noticing but have not fully understood. Write it down. Do not immediately decide what it means. Do not force it into a prediction. Just observe it calmly over time. See whether reality supports what you felt. See whether the pattern becomes clearer. Allow intuition to become the beginning of a question instead of the end of one. Because perhaps that is where the deepest meaning of these symbols lies. Not in telling you exactly what will happen tomorrow, but in encouraging you to notice what you already sense today. So ask yourself one final question. If your palm could not tell you what happens next, but could remind you of something you already know deep inside, what truth would you finally be willing to face? Perhaps the greatest mystery was never hidden in the lines of your hand. Perhaps it was waiting in the part of you that finally became willing to look. The hand may carry the symbol, but the meaning is created by the life you choose to live.